Time to talk maize and blue and get you set for the 2020 campaign as Michigan eyes a Big Ten Eastern Division championship. We got Von Lozon on the line from Maize and Brew. Obviously, with explanation, always having a nice little spin on the nicknames. And we got Von in here to break down Michigan personnel on both sides of the football. Von, how you doing today?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm intrigued by the program. Of course, we know what the hurdle is, and we're not going to focus on that. We'll talk what the personnel look like for 2020 because there's 11 games to be played before we get to that point, and a lot of difficult ones in a schedule that I've seen, and I have yet to do my schedule breakdown, but one of the more difficult schedules in all the country, drawing some of the better teams in the Big Ten Western Division, in addition to a trip to Washington to start things out. But it all starts in replacing Shea Patterson at quarterback. Unfortunately, we've got nothing to go on from spring ball, and that's where all eyes were going to be placed in regards to the quarterback battle. We still thinking Dylan McCaffrey with a slight edge over Joe Milton at this point?
Probably just because of the experience that he has. He's played in a backup role the last 2 years. He's had good experience in the backup role the last 2 years. Remember in 2018 at Notre Dame, Shea Patterson had some cramps that he had to come out of the game. Dylan McCaffrey came in and actually looked pretty good throwing the ball. He looked very comfortable for a redshirt freshman at the time. Still got playing time, but then was knocked out for the rest of the season against Penn State, had a broken collarbone. And then last year he suffered a nasty concussion against Wisconsin. So you didn't really get to see him a ton in the last 2 seasons. You've seen a little bit. You've seen the running. He's a very capable runner, dual threat guy, but he can throw the ball too. Joe Milton, haven't seen a ton from him either. We've obviously seen the arm talent going back to his high school days. He has a cannon for an arm, has showed it off several times. The one that sticks out to me is that 2018 Ohio State game where obviously it was a blowout and they threw Joe Milton in there just to get some reps, and he just launched a ball 50 yards down the field for Nico Collins, and it was like a spiral. It was beautiful. Probably the best ball that he's ever thrown. So at this point, honestly, it's neck and neck, I would imagine. They always give a competition for their quarterbacks in every position, quite frankly. But at the moment, I would probably give McCaffrey the slight edge just because of the experience. But I honestly would not be shocked at all if Joe Milton came out as the winner.
9-10 months ago, going right into the season, we were looking at Michigan's running game, and it looked to be a mess to a certain extent in regards to lack of depth, not a guy to hang your hat on that's going to carry for either the tough yardage or the 20 carries per game. Zach Charbonnet was forced into duty, responded extremely well with 11 touchdowns on the ground, about 5 yards per carry. Then, boom, Hassan Haskins gets discovered, running back commit, linebacker back to running back because they needed him, and he was certainly up to the challenge as well. So now you've got 2 experienced guys where last year it was a question mark. You seem to be in great shape, and Chris Evans comes back as well.
Yeah, running back's a really unique spot right now with the 2 guys coming back. And then obviously with Chris Evans coming back for his final season. He was suspended last year due to academic problems. And then you've got Blake Coram, who was a 4-star a recruit in the 2020 class. He'll be a true freshman this year. So the depth is phenomenal at running back, and it's probably going to be that way for a really long time too. Hassan Haskins, like you mentioned, he was like a diamond in the rough recruit that Jay Harbaugh was going after really hard in that 2018 class, converted him to linebacker and then converted him back to running back. So yeah, I mean, the 1-2 punch of him and Zach Charbonnet is probably going to be one of the better running back tandems in the Big Ten if there is a season to be played this year, which I do think there will be a season to be played. So I would imagine that they're probably 1A, 1B at this point. Chris Evans, it's going to be really interesting to see how they use him in Josh Gaddis's new offense. The last time he played, the offensive coordinator at Michigan was Pep Hamilton, and they didn't really do things on offense the way that Josh Gaddis did things last year. So it'll be interesting to see if they have him more so in the Giles Jackson kind of role where they can split him out wide, put him in the slot, do a lot of creative things with him. I think that's probably what he's destined to become in this offense for his final year at Michigan. And the same with Blake Coram. I think they could probably do the same with him too. So it's a very talented area on the offense. And like you mentioned, going into the 2019 season, people were curious as to who the number one guy would be. Now the question is, who's going to be number 3 and number 4? Because we've already got 2 great running backs, very young running backs as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they work Chris Evans and Blake Coram into the mix, but very talented position as of right now.
Vaughn, the wide receiver unit has been in a state where the recruits have been extremely talented. They've developed in certain areas and not in others. A lot has been pointed to in regards to the offensive style of play, fullbacks and tight ends being featured, and we're not taking advantage of the talent that we've recruited. But then they get the overhaul on offense with Josh Gaddis. That was met with particular criticisms, but also successes, and we'll see with another year in the cycle if it takes off. Your thoughts about the wide receiver position as it stands right now?
Yeah, I think it's good. It's definitely not as talent-rich as it was last year with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Tariq Black. Obviously, Peoples-Jones going to the NFL, Tariq Black transferring to Texas. So they still get Nico Collins back. He was probably their most consistent receiver last season, and he's probably been the most consistent receiver they've had the last 2 years. So he's obviously going to be the number 1 wide receiver at U of M this upcoming season. You still got the youngsters with Giles Jackson and Mike Sainra still, and obviously Ronnie Bell coming back for his junior year as well, another veteran wide receiver on the unit. And then in the 2020 class, you're bringing in a couple 4-stars in A.J. Henning and Roman Wilson. I think that they're going to get some pretty early playing time. These guys are very fast and can play inside or outside. So again, wide receiver, a pretty good unit, definitely not as deep as running back, but wide receiver has a good chance to shine this season as well, just depending on what they do with the quarterback spot.
Before we move to the defense, obviously want to address the offensive line. Those guys go nameless, but they are definitely needed to keep guys off the skill position players, and Michigan's had one of the better units in the Big Ten the last few years, but a ton of losses there, Vaughn, going into 2020.
Yeah, Ed Warner's done a really good job developing those guys, had 4 guys drafted in this past NFL draft, so it really goes to show the work that he's put in on the line. And Jalen Mayfield being the lone returning starter, right tackle. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fill those holes, especially in the depth, to see what the 2 deep's going to look like. But you've got Ryan Hayes. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore. He'll probably get the start at left tackle this season for Michigan. Left guard and right guard, it's really up in the air. One could say Chuck Filiaga, it's probably his time to shine. He's been with the program for several seasons. And then maybe a guy like Nolan Rumler, who is a redshirt freshman this season, who was very highly touted in high school coming out of Ohio. Center, it's probably going to be another redshirt freshman, Zach Carpenter, who was a very highly recruited kid in high school. So it'll be interesting to see not only who starts, but who backs these guys up too, because there's a lot of unknown with offensive line. But if there's one thing that I can trust with Michigan, it's to get good offensive line play from Ed Warner, who's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country.
Talking Michigan football game for the 2020 season here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We've got Von Lozon on the line from Maize n Brew. Please check his workout and the rest of the staff there at SB Nation. Again, it's Maize n Brew. Let's talk defense. Of course, the rankings have been some of the best in the country over the last several years, typically fielding a top 5 to 10 defense, whether you're looking at points against, yardage against, or the advanced metrics. We'll start with Aidan Hutchinson in regards to his productivity last year with 10 tackles for loss and 69 tackles. And you can work on the defense from there and let us know who's coming back and some of the big losses that hit this team every year on the defensive side, but some really talented all Big Ten types.
Yeah, they've got some talent along the defensive line. There's no doubt about that. Aidan Hutchinson probably being the most exciting returning defensive lineman on the team. You get Kwity Paye back for his senior season, so that's big. He had a pretty good 2019 season as well. But the real question is going to be on the interior. Who's going to fill in on the interior alongside Carlo Kemp, who's coming back for his final season as well? Is it going to be a guy, one of the younger kids like Mozzie Smith, who really was a highly touted recruit from the state of Michigan, but didn't really play a ton in his true freshman year? I expected to see him a lot more than I did last season. So it'll be really interesting to see who fills in that void. As of right now, I would imagine it's Chris Hinton, who was a 5-star coming out of high school in Georgia. He got a lot of playing time down the stretch and had a really nice game against Ohio State. So I would imagine he's probably the next guy that you would want to fill in on that interior defensive line, and there's a lot of potential there as well.
And I feel bad for Jim Harbaugh to a certain extent, for a guy that makes over $7 million a year, that's had the success that he has at NFL stops and Stanford and so forth. I shouldn't feel bad for him, but when he gets hit with, why aren't you beating Ohio State? It's like, what can he say? He can't blame the players. And then if he doesn't blame the players, then it's obviously the coach's fault and the coaching staff's fault. But before we get to Ohio State, just the dynamics of the schedule, difficult draws out of the Big Ten Western Division that you've got to deal with. A trip out to Washington. It's been rated one of the 10 most difficult schedules in America, and a significant challenge, obviously, for a program that Jim just said the other day, the sights are on winning the Big Ten and getting to the playoff and winning a national championship.
Well, I'm surprised you feel bad for him, because I don't feel bad for Jim Harbaugh at all. He's making tons of money. He's at his alma mater. He's a big-time head coach, so he'll get it figured out one way or another. I don't feel bad for Jim Harbaugh at all. If anything, I feel bad for the fans who've been waiting for a win against Ohio State for 9 years now. It's been a long time coming since the last time they beat Ohio State, and it's been even longer since they beat an actual competent Ohio State team, because back in 2011, it wasn't a good team, and that was at the Big House, and they won by like a touchdown or something. So just want to get that out there right now. I don't feel bad for Jim Harbaugh one bit.
Maybe I should clarify this, Vaughn. I'm right on board with you. I don't feel bad for him. I feel bad for him in the moment when he has to answer the questions after the game, because you don't have any answers. What kind of answers can he give you? You know, our secondary's getting shredded, but he doesn't want a good coach doesn't point out his players. But at the same, he's got no answers. They were the better team today. And I've watched these news conferences or the press conferences after that game in particular, and he's just lost. And that's not a criticism of him. It's just when you don't have any answers, whether it's a combination talent and coaching gap, that's what it is right now. And he's just trying to figure it out, because the rest of it's pretty well figured out. You take that game out of the sequence, and they're in Indianapolis a number of times over the last 5 years.
Yeah, they've beaten every other Big Ten school at this point under Jim Harbaugh, except for Ohio State. So that's the one that they've got to get figured out. And Jim Harbaugh knows it. Josh Gaddis knows it. Don Brown definitely knows it. So they just got to get it figured out. I don't know what the exact problem is. And, yeah, I mean, Jim Harbaugh having to answer the questions time and time again, especially after 5 times of losing to Ohio State, I wouldn't have an answer for him either. But going back to your original question with the scheduling and all that stuff, if everything stays in place and they do end up going out to Washington, yeah, they're going to have a tough schedule. They got to go to Washington. They got to go to Minnesota, go to Ohio State, go to Michigan State. And Michigan State, of course, breaking in a new head coach, but you can't ever discount your rival on the road for having a good game in store for you. And then they've got Penn State at home, Wisconsin at home, and they've got to go through the rest of the Big Ten. And it's going to be a difficult schedule. I would imagine that they probably have a top 5, top 10 hardest schedule in the country in 2020. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to have challenges every single week. So they got to get it figured out mainly in that last week of the season, because that's pretty much what it all comes down to at this point, whether you're a Michigan fan, a member of the media, whether it be local or national. And they just got to get their stuff figured out. And only time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, the draws out of the Big Ten Western Division, again, to be more specific: Wisconsin, Minnesota on the road, and Purdue. Purdue, coming off a 4-win season, should be much better than that. They've got a better team than that, and you're talking about the 2 best teams in the West last year. Of course, you got to deal with the Big Ten Eastern Division, and as Vaughn more appropriately than me points out, this is all within the context of the COVID-19 situation and the safety guidelines, and just assuming that they get started and they're able to go to the Great Northwest for that date in Seattle to get things started. So, Vaughn, we put you in charge of this whole situation here. What do you think is the bar to keep Jim Harbaugh around versus what would be your bar? What would be your threshold in regards to, because it's a difficult situation when you evaluate a coach and he's going generally 10-2 every year, 9-3, 10-2. Those coaches don't typically get fired, but when there's kind of one obstacle there and he's being paid to win championships, then at some point that trigger is going to be pulled. So where do you think it actually stands, and what would it be for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I honestly don't really have a definitive answer for what I think it is. In my mind, you got to beat Ohio State coming up here in the next couple seasons. And if something happens to where, you get close to beating them, yeah, maybe consider extending his contract, because his contract is reportedly up here pretty soon. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. This season, they may give him a pass just because who knows what's going to happen with this coronavirus and everything like that. So it'll be interesting to see how the coordinator roles get shaped out with all of this too. My bar, yeah, I would definitely want Jim Harbaugh and Michigan to be able to beat Ohio State, or at least compete with Ohio State. They've competed with Ohio State one time in his 5 tries, and it was in 2016 when they lost in double overtime at Ohio State. That was like the one actual game that was somewhat close in those 5 games that Harbaugh has had against Ohio State. So even a competitive game, if you lose by 3 points or 7 points, yeah, you're getting closer to that goal. I want to see progress made in these next couple seasons here to evaluate what would be going on next with the contract negotiations with not only Harbaugh, but everybody.
And to be fair, by any objective measure, whether you're on the Ohio State side, the Michigan side, or just a neutral college football fan, that 2016 game, Michigan outplayed Ohio State, and then the measurement could have gone either way. So Jim Harbaugh didn't necessarily blow that game. It came down to a measurement, right. And we don't know if the measurement was correct or incorrect. It was just what it was. Unfortunately, that's now drawing into the past and can't be used as an excuse, because they've gotten blown out the last 2 years when the talent gap wouldn't tend to make you think that it should have been a blowout game. So you don't know if it's working into the psyche at this point or what it is, but obviously it needs to get done there at Michigan. Well, Vaughn, I appreciate you coming on. I love the breakdown of the personnel because I try to keep up with everyone, but especially the Blue Bloods, of course. And the debate that we get here when we have call-in shows regarding Harbaugh and Michigan, you can imagine, because there's a fight on both ends of it. He's doing a good job. The record's good. The recruiting's been upgraded. The program's on such better ground than it was in 2014 versus you got to beat Ohio State. That's all there is to it. You got to win championships. He's being paid $7 million a year. So there it is. It is just an intriguing talking point in college football, Vaughn, but we appreciate you stopping by to break down the maize and blue.
Thanks again for having me, man. Appreciate it.